Hello, B-siders. Welcome to a new episode of my podcast. As always, I appreciate you being here and joining me, talking to another human being, to another guest of mine. And today is going to be, I had this feeling coming into recording this episode that it's going to be a very in-depth and deep conversation. And I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be really, really cool and probably about things that you haven't heard before. And I'm really interested to see what your takeaways are once you've heard it, because I was blown away when I heard about what's possible with music and how deep, someone can take it when guided by the right person, obviously. Now, my guest today is Andra. Hello, Andra. Welcome and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
My pleasure. Now, Andra is doing something really amazing with her life, and her journey is amazing too. So I can't wait to dive into that. And her bio is, I don't even know where to start with your bio, Andra. It's just amazing to read what you have been learning and doing and still doing. So all I'm going to say really with what you're currently doing is you're an integration guide. And I feel that maybe it's better if you share a little bit what that means to you at this moment in time, because I probably will get it wrong. And it's better coming from you because you know what you're doing. And I don't really. So I admit that and hand it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes I don't really know what I'm doing either. To be completely honest and blunt. But basically, I just take people on integration journeys. So sometimes we can have really far out experiences in basically what are clinically called non-ordinary altered states. And we can have a lot of insights in those experiences and in those altered states of consciousness. So I help people take those insights and ground them into the body, allow those insights to be integrated so that there's a transformation that comes through. And those insights can be very really high states, from like peak experiences, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So really blissful experiences, but they can also be really dark experiences. So like the depths of what humanity can really see in ourselves. So it's the highs and lows.
Does that mean you deal with people who have experienced trauma in their life, for example, but also who had a very wonderful, blissful experience and want to dive deeper into that? Does it go from literally one side to the other? Is that right?
Definitely. Yeah. Trauma work is definitely a part of what I do. And it definitely comes into integrating both the highs and the lows. But trauma work is woven throughout. The lows, I mean, things that we can maybe see in ourselves that we really don't want to see, right? So our deep griefs and sadnesses, things that we would really like to just push aside, or our ability to be jealous and conniving and manipulative and angry, all of these really dark aspects of just part of being human. But instead of shoving those away, which takes a lot of energy to push down and keep away, inviting those aspects of ourselves in so that we can be more full, authentic human beings. And once we invite those aspects in, once we integrate those darker aspects of humanity, there's a lot of expansion that comes in, because all of that energy that was used to shove, push away, gets to be used in creative ways, right? Like anger can be a really beautiful, powerful emotion when it's expressed in the right container, when it's funneled through creative projects. It can be powerful in helping to know what our boundaries are, how to express ourselves clearly in the moment. There's just beautiful aspects to all of this, right? Like even jealousy can teach us things that we want for ourselves, right? Like beauty, compassion, wisdom, being jealous of these types of people really feeds us like, oh, that's because those are qualities that I want for myself, and I can see them in this other person, and yet perhaps I don't necessarily embody them yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense now. Mm. Yeah. So when you say like all the darker sides, it's all the things that society classes as not good or bad, and you shouldn't be like this, and this is dangerous or anything like that. You try to pull that in and help us humans, obviously, to transform that in something. I hate the term useful, but something that we can then use for ourselves to better ourselves
Yeah.
and obviously everything around us. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
because it's ultimately just life energy, and
Mhm,
there's really no good or bad to anything. At least that's my perspective, and
mm,
perfectly fine to
mm.
disagree with that. But when there's no good or bad to anything, then it just depends on how we use it, right? How we utilize it. For what purpose
Mhm,
are we saying things, doing things? And then there's a lot more complexity that comes in into being human.
mm. Nice. That is so interesting. I could talk to you just about that probably for the next hour, but we want to talk about something a little bit different, which ties obviously in with the work that you do, and that is the music bit. But before we go into that, just generally about yourself, how important is music to you? And yeah, how do you sort of use music personally in your life?
Hmm. My goodness, I use it a lot. I use it for working.
Hmm.
So I'm very particular about using specific types of music to help me work. If
Hmm.
I'm creating, if I'm writing, then different types of music will be used, right? I use it for my own process of integration and reflection and deepening into my own being.
Hmm.
I also use it for process work as well. So for movement and dance and to get myself into more of a like a higher state, like a little bit more alive and awake and
Hmm.
giddy and uh, um, just to
Yeah.
shake off the drudge sometimes.
Nice, nice. I love that you use it like basically almost 24/7, I suppose, by the sounds of it,
I do.
which is that's great. I love that. Which then brings me obviously to if you use it for yourself so intensively, I could imagine you use it working with your clients as well. And if you do, how does that look like? And are there different types of ways you can use music in the work that you do?
Definitely, yeah. Um, Yeah, so like I said, if I take people on movement journeys, so via the body, expressing authentically things that, like I was talking about earlier, things that might have been shoved aside and haven't been experienced. Um, so there's that way. So bringing music in to express movement in a creative, expressive manner. There's that. There's also ways to use music in a process of reflection. So if I'm holding a group and I'm giving them time individually to reflect on something, then I might put on some very slow, melodic, reflective type of music to really instill that state in them and to encourage them to go into reflection even deeper.
Hmm.
And then another way that I use it is through a process called inner dance, which is a very deep reflective journey that is usually lasts for about an hour and a half of music listening, and then there's dialogue after that. And then another process that I use it called Kundalini dance, which is again movement, energy, sound. It's a practice that brings people to certain transformations.
Mm. Very interesting. I'm still
Yeah,
amazed how powerful and how versatile music can be in helping us on our own personal journey. One thing that I'm really
definitely.
curious about, and I would love for you to dive into a little bit more, is the inner dance experience. What is that? What's the aim of it? And how does music fit into that? Because I've never heard of that before until you told me, and I was blown away. So I
Mm.
would love for you to share with my audience what that is and how it's
Mm-hmm.
working. That'd be
Mm-hmm.
awesome.
Well, I think most of us know that when we listen to certain types of music, it brings up certain states within ourselves, right? Like certain music will help us feel calm and relaxed.
Mhm,
Certain music will agitate us and will get us hyper, right? Certain music we put on and we just start to bawl our
mhm,
eyes out. So inner dance uses music and sound, sometimes live percussions, to basically instill those states in a very methodical manner. And once those states are implemented in a methodical manner, basically what it does is it trains our brain waves to a certain pattern. Once that pattern is moved through, we enter into an expanded state of consciousness. And what that means is that it can be likened to breath work. Maybe people have heard about that.
mhm,
Or it can be likened to fasting. Like fasting also takes people into an expanded state of consciousness. It can be likened to like psychedelics and entheogens, like LSD or whatever. Those as well take people into an expanded state of consciousness. Just to give you an example of what that means. Yeah.
mhm.
So once people enter into this expanded state of consciousness via inner dance, there's a lot that can happen, right? People can undergo life reviews, people can undergo deep reflections, they can experiment with subtle energies. So feeling the body in a much different way, even feeling the space and connecting to the space. So very like a very spiritual, energetic movement.
Mm.
Um, and stop me at any point if you want to go deeper into any of this. Yeah.
Yep,
Uh,
sure.
and people can have like informational downloads. People can undergo really powerful healing experiences, both physically and emotionally. There's just such a wide variety of what people can experience in inner dance. It's really a beautiful, magical process,
Mhm,
which meets people where they are. Like whatever
mm,
needs to be looked at is what's
mhm.
going to come through in that process.
Okay, that sounds really intense and a little
Yeah,
bit out there, probably for people who
yeah,
haven't heard of it before.
yeah.
And my first thought was, as an introvert, that scares me. Like,
Hmm.
scares me to the point where I just want to go in a corner and hide, because I guess it's talking to the part that sort of, as- for me personally, and I'm thinking a lot of my audience can relate, that because we're introverts, we keep a lot of our emotions and our internal stuff to ourselves. We do not kind of share that with the world.
Mhm,
Whereas inner
mhm,
dance feels like, if you do that, obviously you're surrounded by at least a guide who guides you through it, probably a musician that provides the music. So there will be people there.
mhm.
Isn't that very, very vulnerable when you do that? How can you? I mean, you obviously have to be open to do it, otherwise you wouldn't go there. So for someone like me who sounds really interesting, how there obviously needs to be some work done to get there, I suppose. But yeah, it feels very vulnerable to me to do that.
It is. It definitely is super vulnerable. It, like,
Mm,
yeah, for sure. And I don't necessarily think that you need to be extroverted to be comfortable in being
mm,
vulnerable in safe
mm-hmm,
spaces, right? Because you're only gonna, any participant will only go as far as they feel comfortable to go, right?
right.
They're not forced. They're not,
Mm-hmm,
everything is purely invitational. And
right.
where they go in the process is really up to them. They may simply lie down on their mat, music is
Mm-hmm,
played, and they go into an inner journey, and that's it.
right. Okay. Yeah,
There's
because
no need to share or go into vulnerable places that feel uncomfortable. Anybody only goes as far as they need to.
right. I'm glad I asked. I'm glad you clarified that, because yeah, sometimes I don't know your brain, and I don't know. It just feels like it goes to this place of you have to like open your chest and be all vulnerable doing these experiences, because sometimes when you hear other people talk about it, oh, I broke down crying, and you know, I mean, it's sort of this perception I think I might have around processes like that that are completely wrong. So speaking to you obviously is the perfect thing to do to clarify
Mm,
that. Okay, so you could
mm.
also look at it almost as a really, I don't like to say meditation, but like just being still and going inwards. Is that also how that process can work? Because if you hear dancing, you think about people moving around and, you know.
Yeah. So even though dance is in the word, there's
Hmm.
actually no dancing going on.
Okay, great. I'm glad we get to that one. Is that more of a
Yeah. So basically,
symbolism of what could happen inside of you, like a dance with your
yeah,
different parts of the self?
exactly. Definitely. And as well, once people go through the process over an extended period of time, there's something that gets awakened in the body, which is quite esoteric and pretty far out. So when it initially happens, it can be a little bit unnerving, and some fear will definitely be brought up. Uh, but once that fear is surpassed, there's a beautiful intelligence to the body that's tapped into. Yeah.
Wow.
So once we realize that there's a wisdom to the body, and the body can authentically express itself and move through pain and suffering on in a very creative manner, then there's um, there's a doorway that's opened basically to life and being and to what we're capable of, because then we realize that we don't need to just live up here in the head and in the brain, but that we can actually drop down into the body and live from a much fuller place.
Wow. Let that sink in. I'm trying to let it sink in.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny? And I don't know if other people you work with or talk to about this. It feels like to me that when you just explain that, what happens after this process, that kind of my body just went yes, and my brain
Mm.
went really.
Yeah.
I just felt this kind of reaction there.
Yeah.
Is that what a lot of people get when you talk to them about this inner dance journey before they actually have done it?
Um, yes and no. I mean, if I think back to years ago when I first did it, when I tried it for the first time, I had no idea what I was walking into. And the facilitate, I was living in a like in a mindful meditation like community in northern Thailand, and the facilitator was like, "All right, everybody, come in, you know, lay down on your yoga mats and the shavasana posture, which is like the traditional ending posture at a yoga class, where you're just kind of, splayed out on the floor like in a star, in a star shape." And and he was like, I'm gonna play some music and just have a journey and see what happens, see what comes through. Right? You might dream, your body might move a little bit, just see what happens. And I laid down, and I had none of the brain stuff. Well, this is really weird. Like, what's going on? It was just a beautiful experience of being in flow, where it felt so authentic, so expansive, so safe and comforting for me to undergo that process. And then
Mm.
after some points, then I was like, then the mind comes in and this is really strange. Like, it's not logical. It doesn't make sense. It goes against the mainstream, like physical way of looking at science. And what does this mean? Basically, because we start to ask ourselves a lot of questions, right? What is life? How have I lived life up to this point? What is knowing? Um, how do I understand things? Do I only understand things through my brain, or can my body understand things in a different capacity as well? And is there something that's useful in that?
Mm.
it takes us out of our habitual ways of looking at things, where we think that I am skin and that is all I am.
Mm. Okay. Wow. I mean, it does sound amazing. And I guess once you try it, it's probably really worth it. Which then brings me to the next question. How can you do it when maybe there's no one around to guide you? There might not be any of those guides who know what to do and how to do that whole process. Is there any way we should even try it ourselves? Or is that something you say, no, please don't?
Um, you can try it yourself. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I think it would
Mhm.
be quite um, a shocking initiation
Okay.
without a safe community.
Hmm.
Um, but with that said, some people like to shock themselves, and like
Yeah, I guess
if
so.
yeah, like people go skydiving just for the fan of feeling like they're gonna
Mm.
smash into Earth, right? Like it's just that adrenaline drive. So sure, there's that aspect, but I would recommend that
Mm.
the community and the safe container and like the importance of setting are really key,
Mm.
because the more safe that you can feel, then the
Hmm.
more surrender comes in, and the more
Gotcha.
surrendering that comes in, then the
Mhm.
more expansive and um, full the journey can be.
Right, gotcha. Okay, so it's something that's definitely better done in an environment that's created for that process. So you
I'd
get,
say so.
yeah, okay, cool.
I would say so. Just when it comes to safety, safety is a big thing, right? So
Hmm. Yeah,
like
of
having
course.
informed consent if anything happens, and if there is something, like we were talking about, those like shoved aspects of ourselves that we push away, that we don't want to look at, if something like
Hmm.
that does come up, it's important to have the impact of a caring other, right? Whether it's a guide or a therapist, just to hold us and be with us there. Because we don't
Mm.
have to be alone with the parts that show up, right? Like we
Hmm.
can receive support there, we can be in community there, just so that it provides some healing.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. We do have to highlight that certain practices you better not do it yourself. So this one's obviously one of them for the reasons you mentioned. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. That is amazing. And I'm starting to think and also understand to a very small level of my journey through all this that there's so many practices like an inner dance out there that have existed for probably thousands of years, that have been practiced by traditional people, like probably the Aborigines here in Australia have it, the American Indians in the States, and wherever else there's traditional people, landowners. And we only kind of discover
Definitely.
that now, isn't it? Which is in a way crazy and sad that we've
Mm,
come that far and yet we don't know anything sometimes. So
mm,
yeah, I find that fascinating and sad
yeah.
at the same time. I don't know how you feel about that.
I agree. I do feel that there's a sadness there. And yet at the same time, these practices have existed throughout communities around the world for eons, like you said, right? So it's not
Mhm.
that we've forgotten them, it's just that they're not part of mainstream culture, right?
Mhm.
In mainstream culture, it's okay for us to have a coffee in the morning, which changes our consciousness, right? Like that takes us into an altered state of consciousness, even though we don't speak about it. But we have our coffee in the morning, and we have our alcohol on the weekends sometimes, right? And then that's okay to take us into those altered states. But actually using altered states in an intentional manner via music can bring
Mm.
such healing and insight and expansion and connection, community, like beautiful things that I think are universal values for most of humanity,
Mm.
right? Like there's such juicy goodness in these expanded experiences that can come from like anything really, right? Like music, dance,
Mm.
breath work, fasting. There's so many different modalities, and they're so old. They're not
Mm.
new, right? They're super, super, super old.
Mm-hmm.
We've just, I think, the upheaval of like the psychedelic renaissance is what they're calling it, starting from like sort of the 60s and the 50s, has brought the usefulness of these altered states of consciousness back into psychology. And now that academia is looking at, now it's beginning to trickle through down into mainstream. So now
Mm.
mainstream is beginning to look at, cold water dips or breath work, yoga, meditation, because they're realizing that they're super beneficial for
Mm.
us. Really,
Yeah.
really beneficial. Like, you talk about being an introvert, like, so am I. I'm I've always been an introvert, and it's I mean, I love to spend time on my own. I love to be in my own space. I love calming, settling environments.
Mm-hmm.
I love deep conversations. And all these altered states have provided me a space to get to know myself a little bit better. And
Mm.
in getting to know myself, I can also learn to accept myself as well.
Mm.
And then I don't have to seek out and do really crazy things like, get drunk and not
Mm-hmm.
remember what I did, right? Like I can be a lot more intentional with the time that I have in this life.
Mm. I was just thinking when you talked about all these practices have been around for so long, and then when you mentioned music, community, things like that, from where I'm coming from, I look at it and think, oh, okay, now I kind of understand a bit more why people probably go to concerts. And it's like this
Mm.
collectiveness of being in the same room with music that lifts us up. And I did have like concerts where I was like, oh my God, I felt like I'm in a different space because it was just
Yeah.
so good. And it lifted me to somewhere,
Yeah.
where I couldn't, it felt like the whole room was just one.
Yeah.
So I guess that's probably part of these ancient traditions that we've just adapted in a new way. That's maybe a bit more commercial if you want to go down that road. But
Mm.
still underlying, it still goes back to that piece that's, I don't know, thousands of years old, perhaps.
Yeah.
Do you see
Yeah,
that?
definitely. Yeah,
Mm.
I definitely agree with that. And the commercial aspect is definitely true, and I think that breaks my heart. But on the other hand, things that were, thousands of years ago, like there would be the community. You'd be in the community, and everybody would take care of one another. Now in Canada where I am, and in
Mhm.
Australia where you are, like we're highly individualistic societies, right? Where we're expected to pay rent and pay for our own things, and nobody takes care of us, right? There's no really service anymore.
Mm.
um I mean, how many of us have time to, volunteer hours on end to be of service to the community? Not
Mm.
very many of us, right? Like it's mostly like university students and high school students and then retirees, because everybody in the middle is
Yeah.
just working, taking care of themselves, how taking care of their house, trying to keep their bodies healthy, trying to eat
Mhm.
healthy food. And you know yeah, it's just
Yeah. Be nice if we
this
all were
commercial.
allowed, at least once or twice a year to have a long weekend that's paid for, and you could just go on these practice weekends where you can just allow yourself to be in around a community like that and explore.
Yeah,
And yeah, because the benefits I think will be amazing to the whole of society. So,
I agree.
mm,
I agree. I think that if we were to create more of these spaces where we could authentically connect to ourselves and to other people in our community and feel
mhm,
safe, and feel like you touched on vulnerability earlier, right? Like feel safe enough to be vulnerable in community. Like there's just such healing that comes from that, because then we realize that I'm no different than you are, and your desires for for feeling peace and happy are actually my desires as well. So then
Mm-hmm.
how can we connect and move forward together based on those values?
Yeah. And that's what the world needs more than ever, I think. This, yeah, being able to relate to each other. It does feel like there's so much disconnect going on right now for myself and
Yeah,
everybody else, which is so sad. And that's why
it
people like
is.
you are needed, I guess.
Mm.
I think
Yeah, and
so.
I think that that's where the beauty of music comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it does help us feel connected. It does help us feel like there's a I don't know what word to use here. Like, there's something more to life than just working and doing
Yeah.
and whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like it takes us it takes us into these more expanded states of feeling peace, feeling love, and even
Mm,
feeling sadness, right? And feeling the grief as well. Like just all of it, like all of it is part of life.
mm,
And that's why I love music, that we can intentionally use it to take us into these states, right?
mm-hmm,
And also we can use it as a support when we are in those states, that we
mm-hmm.
can use it to help us work better. We can help us use it to relax better. It can help us use, it can help us, oh, I'm getting tongue tied.
Don't worry, it happens to me all the time.
Can you delete that part out? I'm kidding. No, but basically it can be so helpful, right? Like it's such a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful, useful tool for us.
Mm,
It's not just something that's, art and that's it. Like we're connected to it.
yeah, absolutely. And didn't they, I just think about it and I hope I get this right, but isn't like there's sound playing in the universe out there in space? They have like certain form of sounds. So
Yeah.
I, I always say that we are so connected to music, we don't realize how connected we are to it because everything is sound. Even if you go into space, there is a certain sound there. It might not
Hmm.
sound like the traditional music we think of, but it's there. So yeah, that gives me the chills just thinking about it, how much
Yeah.
more, like you said, than just skin and bones we actually are.
Yeah. Like the planet
Yeah.
has like a frequency that it vibrates with at, right?
Mm.
And that creates a sound. Ice breaking creates a sound, and if you listen to that, it's so mesmerizing and so beautiful. It can take you in a completely altered state where it doesn't feel like you're just sitting in a chair in a, you know, rectangular concrete room. You feel like you're in outer space.
Mm.
um, Trees make sounds, and
Mm-hmm.
you can hear, and it sounds like it's music.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I 150% agree with you.
Yeah.
This inner
Yeah, so
dance
how can,
sounds really interesting. So yeah, I think I'll need to dive into that a little bit more and have a think about maybe eventually giving it a go and see what happens. And just
oh,
you
please shoot me an email and let me know how it was for you. Yeah, I would love to hear what your experience
yeah,
was.
I'll
It
definitely
is,
have.
yeah, it's a really magical practice, because it just takes us into a state of
Mm,
flow, right?
mm,
Instead of only being in our mind and only being analytical and logical, it takes us
mm,
into sort of, it drops us into like the life of the universe, which is all creation and all flow and constantly evolving and changing. Like there's just this beautiful expansion that is possible.
oh, wonderful. Well, I think we've covered a lot today. And I think that inner dance in itself, yeah, was absolutely worth talking about. And I hope we've intrigued a lot of people to actually go and find out more about it and maybe even do it. So hopefully we'll get some feedback or maybe even questions around it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this. This was a wonderful conversation on a so much deeper level than yeah, I think we need those conversations a little bit more. And I felt it was really gentle and nice and not frightening at all. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing all you have. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your show. And if anybody has any questions about inner dance, I'm happy to shoot back and forth over an
Yeah,
email. I know it can bring up a lot of questions and curiosities, and I'm fully open to
absolutely. Yeah.
chatting about those.
Yes,
Mhm.
all your details will obviously be in the episode descriptions. If anyone's interested, please get in touch with Andra and she'll, as you said, you're more than happy to answer questions. Right. Well, time has flown. Here's my German thing coming in. Now you thought you had a tongue thing. I have one now.
It's passed on
Yeah,
to you.
it's all good. Things like that happen. Yes, it's been a wonderful episode, and I hope you B-siders got so much out of it like I have. And I appreciate you being here on this journey with me and my guests. And as I always say, keep on dancing and keep on rocking and yeah, keep on working on yourself and maybe go on that inner journey that we all should do. And until my next episode, thank you so much for being here, and I'll talk and see you again very soon. Thank you very much. Bye.